In today's gospel, we see a very different Peter than the one we encounter in the rest of the New Testament. Usually, Peter acts boldly. It was he who stood up and proclaimed, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," when Jesus asked what people said of him. Peter also acts boldly when Jesus' disciples start to leave, because Jesus told them he would give them his flesh to eat and his blood to drink. At that moment, Peter says, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of everlasting life. We have come to believe that you are the Messiah." At times, Peter could also be brash and speak out of turn. When Jesus is transfigured with Moses and Elijah at his side, Peter wants to set up 3 tents, thinking that he could somehow contain them and their glory in this location. In front of the other disciples at the Last Supper, Peter claims that he would never deny Jesus and would willingly die with him. At the Garden of Olives, it is Peter who draws the sword and cuts off the ear of a high priest's servant. These are only a few examples of the New Testament of Peter acting boldly and brashly. However, today's gospel shows us a more humble Peter. He is aware that he has denied our Lord and abandoned him, though he claimed he would defend him to the death. He is aware that he spent the week of Easter behind locked doors of the upper room for fear of the Roman authorities. At one time, Peter boasted of his love for Jesus and the lengths that he would go to prove his devotion to him. Now, Peter is chastened and humbled by his failures. The key to understand the exchange between Jesus and Peter in today's gospel is the Greek words used in the original text. The 2 words used for love are philia, which means the love between friends, and agape, which means the unconditional love of God. When Jesus asks Peter if he loves him, Jesus uses the word agape for unconditional love. However, Peter replies using the word philia for the love between friends. Peter is not so sure of himself anymore. He's not so sure that he can love Jesus unconditionally. He has been humbled and maybe even a little broken by his failure and his sin. Nonetheless, Jesus accepts Peter as he is, with a broken, hurting heart that is not sure that it can love unconditionally. He forgives Peter and he calls him again to follow him. Life has a way of humbling us, and in particular, the Christian way of life can often leave us doubting ourselves. We may have begun, for instance, this past Lenten season with every good intention of praying and sacrificing more, only to fail a few weeks or maybe even a few days after Ash Wednesday. As Christian parents, we may see ourselves failing to give good example all the time to our children, or we may find ourselves falling into the same old patterns of habitual sin despite having confessed them over and over and over again. All of these experiences can leave us humbled and maybe even a little broken, like St. Peter. They may make us question whether we really love God with our whole heart, our whole mind, our soul and strength. There is no need for us to fear and no need to hide. Jesus accepts us as we are. He extends his forgiveness to us no matter how much we may have offended him. If our love for him has grown cold, Jesus wants to kindle a fire to warm it up again. If our spirits have grown weary, Jesus will give us rest and renew our strength. We just need to imitate Peter, and that is to run to Jesus. We also have to believe that he calls us to follow him no matter how sinful we are, no matter how weak or broken we are. One of the tricks of our enemies of our soul, the devil, who is a real person, is to convince us that we have to get our act together before we can follow Jesus. However, if that were the case, there would be no saints. But rather, just as Jesus called Peter to feed his lamb, so he calls us to serve his people despite our sinfulness and brokenness. To follow Jesus means to entrust ourselves to his care with faith that he will work through us despite our weaknesses. At the same time, Jesus doesn't want us to stay stuck and broken. He promises that if we trust our lives to him, he will heal us. We can be sure of that. It may not happen as quickly as we would like it to. It may also involve some pain and sacrifices on our part. But Jesus will never abandon us. In time and with patience, he will make our hearts capable of showing the unconditional agape love that is the mark of his own sacred heart. Peter is our example. Though he is humbled and broken after having denied Jesus, our Lord tells him that he will one day glorify God by dying for the faith. And in fact, some 30 years after the conversation we heard in today's gospel between Jesus and Peter on the beach, Peter will be crucified upside down in Rome for proclaiming the good news. And we see Peter return to his former boldness in today's first reading when he refuses to follow the Sanhedrin's orders, saying that it is better to obey God than man. He even rejoices that he is mistreated for bearing witness to the name. So, my friends, let us approach this altar today with our brokenness and our contrite hearts. We are not worthy to receive him, and no matter how hard we try, we will never be worthy to receive him. But in Jesus' mercy, he speaks the words that heals us. And in his great agape love for us, he empowers us to worship him in spirit and in truth. And if we trust him enough and listen hard enough to his prompting, he will also call us to glorify God by our lives.